In that classroom, the professor pointed at him and said, "You'll never amount to anything. You're destined for failure." The class laughed, and those words echoed like a sentence. But instead of breaking him, they lit a flame within him that would never be extinguished. Years later, when that same professor saw his face plastered across the covers of business magazines, he realized life's cruel irony. The student they called a failure was now signing billion-dollar contracts. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's living proof that discipline and vision can transform the greatest humiliation into the fuel of the greatest victory. The classroom was plunged into silence when Professor Collins, already tired of Noah Steele's dreamy attitude, decided to expose him in front of everyone. "You'll never amount to anything," he said firmly, almost like a sentence. "You're destined to fail." Those words pierced the air like blades, and the class immediately burst into laughter. Some classmates repeated in chorus, mocking, "Failure! Failure!" Others pointed at him, laughing out loud, as if witnessing the funniest spectacle of the year. Noah felt his face burn, not only with shame, but with the feeling of helplessness. The weight of humiliation crushed him, and the worst was knowing it came not just from his classmates, but from the professor himself, the authority figure he was supposed to inspire. In that moment, Noah felt as if a sentence had been written over his life, as if a stamp of defeat had been stamped on his forehead. But, silently, something different began to blossom within him, a refusal to accept that fate. He lowered his head, trying to hide his teary eyes, but inside, a volcano was building. He remembered the hardships at home, the overdue bills, the hardships his family faced. As if bearing the mark of poverty wasn't enough, now he would also be branded a failure at school. His heart pounded, somewhere between anger and sadness. But, contrary to what everyone expected, it didn't break him. On the contrary, it awakened a strength that had lain dormant within him until then. As the laughter echoed, Noah silently repeated a promise. "One day, I will prove everyone wrong." With each laugh, he felt as if he were gathering fuel for a flame that grew ever larger. In that instant, the humiliated boy began to transform into someone willing to face the impossible. When the bell rang and his classmates left, commenting on the scene, Noah remained seated, facing his own pain as if it were a challenge. That phrase, "You'll never amount to anything," echoed in his mind like an invisible scar. But instead of carrying it as a weakness, he decided to tattoo it on his soul as motivation. He knew that if he didn't do something, he would spend his life believing Collins's words. So, that very day, he made a solemn promise to himself. He would turn every mockery into stepping stones, every humiliation into fuel, every tear into steel. And when the time came, the world would hear his name. Noah didn't know how or when, but he was certain of one thing: he would win. And that silent promise would be the beginning of a journey that would take him from the halls of shame to the rooms where billion-dollar contracts would be signed. That night, Noah Steele returned home in silence. Collins's words echoed like hammer blows in his mind. "You'll never amount to anything." He locked himself in the small room he shared with his younger brother and threw himself on the bed, staring at the leak-stained ceiling. Silent tears flowed, but with them something was being born that no one could see. In that cramped space, between peeling walls and stifled dreams, Noah made a secret vow. He would never let laughter define his future. He might be poor, he might be humiliated, but he would never accept being remembered as a failure. Every cruel word would be saved as kindling for the fire that would keep him alive. It wasn't just a promise, it was a pact with his own destiny. And deep down, he knew that when the world saw his triumph, it would remember exactly the day he was called nothing. While the world slept, Noah lay awake, eyes open in the darkness. He imagined himself years ahead, walking through glass offices, signing contracts in front of businessmen who would once have ignored him. He saw flashes of a life of achievements, cars, travel, and freedom, not to show off, but to prove it was possible. He began to understand that failure only exists when you give up, and giving up, for him, ceased to be an option that night. Every detail of the future was rehearsed in his mind as if it were already real. His dreams weren't daydreams. They were plans, invisible seeds planted silently. He didn't need anyone to believe in him. He just needed to believe in himself. And this solitary faith, cultivated in pain, would become his greatest weapon. In the following days, he carried that oath like a powerful secret. He no longer argued with colleagues, nor responded to provocations. He kept everything inside, transforming pain into energy. He learned to smile in the face of ridicule, knowing that time would be his greatest ally. It was as if he had discovered a secret weapon, patience. While everyone laughed at him, Noah was silently building the foundation of his own victory. The sentence that should have been his end became his starting point. He knew that empty promises don't change destinies, but promises accompanied by action create empires. And it was this silent promise that pushed him to take the first steps toward a completely different life. The days following that promise weren't easy. Noah Steele, still a teenager, had to deal with the harshness of life while carrying a gigantic dream within himself. The family lived on a shoestring, and often there wasn't even enough money to buy a snack at school. To help out at home, he took on any kind of job, delivering newspapers at dawn, mowing lawns in neighbors' yards, carrying shopping bags at the market in exchange for a few coins. Each coin earned seemed small to others, but for him it was a silent victory, proof that he was on the right path. While his peers spent their afternoons playing or spending on superfluous things, Noah gained real-world experience. With each client he served, he learned about discipline, responsibility, and perseverance. The boy called a failure began to write his own definition of value. Despite his best efforts, reality insisted on testing his patience. There were days when the money simply wasn't enough, and he would return home tired, his hands dirty from work, but with nothing to bring to the table. At those times, Collins's cruel voice echoed in his mind, almost like a sadistic reminder, "You'll never amount to anything." And it was precisely on those nights that Noah reinforced his silent promise. Instead of surrendering to despair, he told himself that the pain was fleeting, but the learning would be eternal. He discovered that the world doesn't reward immediately, but always returns the effort multiplied to those who don't give up. He was planting seeds that would take time to sprout, but he was certain the harvest would come. Every sacrifice was seen as an investment, every defeat as a practical lesson preparing him for something greater. Over time, Noah came to understand that the small tasks he performed were merely rehearsals for the future he dreamed of. It didn't matter if he was delivering newspapers or mowing lawns. With each job, he practiced discipline, consistency, and patience. He began saving every penny he could, stashing it in an old tin can hidden under his bed. To anyone else, that money would be insignificant. To him, it was the symbol of his emerging independence. He believed that sooner or later, he would find an opportunity to invest and change his life. And while many continued to laugh at him, Noah smiled silently, knowing he was one step ahead. Because even if no one saw it, he was already laying the foundations for a future that would silence the entire world. It was on an ordinary day that fate decided to place Noah Steele in front of someone who would change his life. After spending the morning mowing lawns and the afternoon helping out at a small grocery store, he landed a temporary job as a waiter at a simple restaurant. It was exhausting, but the meager pay helped sustain his silent promise. As he waited tables, Noah heard stories from customers who lived completely different lives than his. Some talked about business, others about travel, and that fueled his curiosity. One such night, he overheard two men in elegant suits animatedly discussing investments, mindset, and financial discipline. Their words seemed to come from another world. Moved by the courage that only comes from pain, Noah approached and asked, "How can I learn to live like you?" The table fell silent. For a few seconds, he thought he would be ridiculed once again. But instead of laughter, he received a look of surprise and interest. One of the men, impressed by the boldness of that thin young man, in the worn uniform and eyes full of determination, decided to give him some simple but powerful advice. If you want to change your life, start by changing your mindset. Read, learn, study. Money is only a consequence of the right mindset. For Noah, those words weren't just advice. They were like a key opening an invisible door. For the first time, someone validated his desire to grow, instead of mocking it. The phrase echoed in his mind for days, like a new sentence, but this time, a positive one. He understood that it wasn't enough to just work hard physically. He needed to nourish his mind with knowledge, discipline, and vision. That encounter would become a turning point. Noah left the restaurant that night empty-handed, but with something infinitely more valuable, a new direction for his life. From that day on, he immersed himself in the world of books with an insatiable thirst. He bought used copies in secondhand bookstores, borrowed them from public libraries, and spent entire nights reading about business, investments, and stories of people who started from nothing. While his peers wasted their time partying and having fun, Noah spent hours absorbing every word as if it were food for the soul. He discovered biographies of entrepreneurs who turned rags into fortunes and realized he was not alone in his struggle. With each page, he reinforced his belief that poverty was not a sentence, but merely a starting point. Professor Collins had called him a failure, but the books said otherwise, that failure is merely a temporary stage for those with discipline. And so Noah began to see, for the first time, a real path out of darkness and toward greatness. Armed with the knowledge he had gained from books and the quiet determination he carried within, Noah Steele decided it was time to act. He didn't just want to learn theories. He wanted to put them into practice. He gathered every penny he had stashed in his tin can under his bed, savings from mowing lawns, carrying boxes, and waiting tables, and decided to take a chance. The plan was simple but bold, to open a small used computer repair service, something he had taught himself by reading manuals and researching in public libraries. With the little he had, he bought inexpensive parts and improvised a space in his backyard. For him, this business was more than a makeshift workshop. It was the first concrete step toward proving he wasn't the failure Collins had declared. But, as with every first attempt, reality was harsh. Noah faced difficulties he could never have anticipated. Customers were few, and many were wary of entrusting their equipment to a young man with no formal experience. Some purchased parts didn't work, and repairs took longer than expected. There were even situations where he had to return the money because he couldn't complete the job. With each failure, he remembered the laughter in class and felt the weight of shame. But instead of giving up, he turned each mistake into a learning experience. He discovered that the first step doesn't always lead to the destination, but it always leads to lessons no one can steal. Each night of frustration made him more resilient. Each dissatisfied customer forced him to improve. After a few months, the small workshop closed. For his neighbors and colleagues, it was confirmation that he truly was a failure. Many said, "See, he tried, but he wasn't cut out for this." Noah, however, saw it differently. For him, that business hadn't been a defeat, but a training ground. He learned about customer service, time management, purchasing supplies, and, above all, the importance of not giving up after the first setback. He saved his notes, organized what little he had left, and made an even stronger promise. If he had to fail 10 times, he would, but he would never abandon the path. And this mindset would be what prepared him for the next stage, a period of sacrifices so intense they would test the limits of his endurance. After closing his first workshop, Noah Steele understood that the path to success wouldn't be linear. It wasn't enough to dream, nor just try. He had to withstand the weight of failures and persist even when everything told him to give up. He took on new, temporary jobs, some humiliating, just to support himself and keep saving money. During the day, he carried boxes in warehouses. At night, he immersed himself in books on business and technology. His friends mocked him, saying he wasn't enjoying his youth, but no one knew he was sowing seeds. He repeated to himself, "Sacrifice now, freedom later." This phrase became his daily mantra, reminding him that the difficult present was just the price he had to pay for the future he desired. The sacrifice wasn't just physical, but emotional. Noah often saw his classmates at parties, trips, and celebrations, while he spent the early mornings alone in his room, lit only by the dim glow of a lamp. The silence of the night was filled with the sound of turning pages and thoughts of how he would apply each lesson learned. Exhaustion haunted him, but he refused to give in. There were days when he fell asleep over his books, his head resting on notes, waking only to return to work. His life seemed monotonous to the outside world, but within him grew an invisible strength. He knew the pain would be fleeting, but the fruits of his labor would be eternal. Each restless night was seen as an investment, not a loss. Still, the pressure was almost unbearable. There were moments when he felt the weight of loneliness, when Collins's voice returned to him like a shadow. "You'll never amount to anything." But instead of fearing those words, Noah turned them into fuel. He kept telling himself that he couldn't afford to stop. Temporary failure was acceptable, but giving up was not. This relentless discipline began to shape his identity. He was no longer just the humiliated boy. He was transforming into a silent warrior. Each day lived in pain brought him closer to victory. And it was precisely during this period of extreme sacrifice that life decided to reward him with his first great victory, a contract that would change everything. After months of tireless effort, sleepless nights, and days of sacrifice, Noah Steele finally saw a real opportunity present itself. A small local businessman, the owner of a struggling store, decided to give him a chance. Noah had offered his digital marketing services, something he had learned on his own through hours of study, even though he had never formally worked in the field. The businessman was skeptical, but the passion in Noah's eyes and the confidence in his words were enough to convince him. For the first time, someone believed in his ability. This seemingly small contract was much more than a business agreement. For Noah, it represented validation of years of pain transformed into learning. It was living proof that his sleepless nights had not been in vain. Determined to deliver results, Noah threw himself into his work with complete intensity. He studied the market, created campaigns, adjusted strategies, and monitored every detail obsessively. While other consultants would only work on the basics, he dedicated himself as if the company were his own. Within a few weeks, the results began to appear. Sales increased, customers returned, and the store was out of the red. The impressed businessman not only paid for the service, but also recommended it to other contacts. Noah had transformed his first opportunity into a network of new doors that opened. The boy called a failure was beginning to become a benchmark for competence. The seemingly small contract had become a springboard for something much bigger. Word spread quickly. Soon, Noah was approached by other entrepreneurs interested in his work. His reputation as a resilient, disciplined, and innovative young man began to spread. What had once been just a dream was now becoming a reality. With each new client, he remembered the scene in the classroom when he'd been called a failure. The difference was that now he had concrete proof that he wasn't. For the first time, he was experiencing the taste of true victory. It wasn't luck, it wasn't chance. It was the fruit of years of pain, sacrifice, and determination. And this first victory wouldn't be the end, but the beginning of a climb that would take him to the top of the market and, one day, to signing billion-dollar contracts. With his first victory solidified, Noah Steele realized he was faced with a unique opportunity to transform his life. What began as a small contract soon multiplied. Local business owners began recommending him by word of mouth, and before long, he had a client base he could never have imagined. Each project delivered with excellence increased his credibility. The young man who had been ridiculed in the classroom was now sought after by respected businessmen. He became synonymous with competence, discipline, and innovation. And as the work piled up, so did his ambition. Noah knew he couldn't stop. He needed to broaden his horizons. He began studying the market globally, understanding that his mission was not just to win locally, but to become a benchmark anywhere in the world. Determined to take the leap, Noah invested every penny in his own company. He set up a simple but functional office, hired a small team of young people who believed in his vision, and began expanding his services. He offered not just marketing solutions, but experiences that transformed businesses. His innovative methods attracted attention, and he soon attracted investors interested in supporting his growth. With iron discipline, he reinvested all profits, refusing to live on appearances. While many in his position would lose themselves in immediate luxuries, Noah focused on expansion and solidity. With each new step he conquered, he felt he was proving to himself and to the world that no one had the right to define him as a failure. The climb was so rapid that it soon crossed borders. Noah began participating in international conferences, where he presented his methods to businesspeople from various countries. His story of overcoming adversity inspired, and his competence impressed. Larger contracts began to arrive, and with them, the opportunity to consolidate his company on the global stage. The boy humiliated in the classroom was now closing million-dollar deals in luxurious meeting rooms. But deep down, he knew there was still a way to go. The past remained his greatest motivation, and fate, with its inevitable irony, would soon bring him face to face with the one who had once called him a failure. The years had passed, and Noah Steele was no longer the humiliated boy in a classroom. Now, he was a respected businessman, internationally known, owner of a company that generated unimaginable amounts of money. But fate had prepared a special, almost poetic scene. One day, he was invited to speak at an educational conference at the very school where he had attended. His heart raced as he read the invitation. He remembered every detail of that room. The laughter, Collins's cruel words. He accepted immediately, knowing it would be the stage for a symbolic turning point. Upon arriving, the hallways that had once echoed with humiliation were now lined with posters celebrating his story of overcoming obstacles. The atmosphere was different, but the memory still stung. When he stepped onto the auditorium stage, he saw dozens of young faces watching expectantly. Among them, sitting discreetly, was Professor Collins, older now, with graying hair and a serious expression. Noah took a deep breath. There was no need to humiliate him or repeat the pain he had felt. He knew his greatest answer was already there, in front of everyone. He had won. He began to talk about his journey, describing the nights of sacrifice, the days of pain, and the times he considered giving up. He spoke honestly, without hiding his stumbles, because he knew the truth was more powerful than any rehearsed speech. With each sentence, he saw tears in some of the students' eyes. They saw in Noah not just a billionaire businessman, but a mirror of their own struggles. At the end, Noah paused, looked at Collins, and said, "Someone once called me a failure, but I learned that failure only exists when we give up on ourselves." The room fell into absolute silence. Some students shivered, others began to applaud. Collins, for his part, lowered his head, lacking the courage to face the one he had condemned to oblivion. Noah felt no anger, only gratitude, because, deep down, he knew that without that humiliation, he might never have found the spark that drove him. He stepped off the stage to deafening applause. And it was there, before the same school that once saw him as nothing, that Noah Steele showed the world the true meaning of transforming pain into power. Today, Noah Steele is remembered not only as a successful businessman, but as a living symbol of overcoming obstacles. The boy who was humiliated in class, who was told by his teacher that he would never amount to anything, now signs billion-dollar contracts in luxurious boardrooms. His story resonates as a powerful reminder that no one has the right to define another person's future. What began as pain became fuel, and what seemed like a sentence of failure became the starting point for an extraordinary life. Noah didn't erase the scars of his past. He transformed them into invisible trophies. Every cruel word, every laugh, every tear became a stepping stone on the ladder that led him to the top. But the most inspiring aspect of his journey isn't just the numbers, nor the million-dollar contracts he's signed today. The true power of Noah's story lies in its message. You can be called a failure, you can be humiliated, you can even be discarded by those who should believe in you. But none of that matters if you choose to believe in yourself. Noah understood that discipline, resilience, and vision are stronger than any external judgment. He proved that the world may laugh at you today, but time will always reveal the truth. Because time is the fairest judge, and only those who persist have the right to achieve the impossible. Noah Steele didn't just want to get rich. He wanted to show that destiny is shaped by our choices, not by the opinions of others. Today, those who once laughed can only applaud. The boy called failure is now an inspiration to millions, reminding everyone that the words of others only have power if you allow them to. His life is proof that scars can turn into medals, and that limits are, in fact, illusions. And the final lesson he leaves is clear: never allow anyone to dictate who you are. Failure isn't about falling, it's about giving up. If you have the courage to keep going, the whole world, sooner or later, will have to bow before your victory. If Noah Steele's journey inspired you, subscribe to the channel now, activate the bell, and leave a like so more people can discover that failure is not the end, but the beginning of victory. And share this video with someone who has been called a failure.